All right, welcome to the September 25th, 2024 Special Board of Education meeting, study session on facilities. Be moving on to item 1B, land acknowledgement and pledge of allegiance. As the Folsom Cordova Unified School District, we acknowledge that our administrative facilities and schools occupy the unceded territory of the Nishinan and Miwok, the original people of the skies, land, and waters, where we work and learn. We also recognize the presence and ancestral stewardship of the Nishinan ancestral tribes in the Esto, Nodamuse, and Nisim Pawene to the north, and the Miwok ancestral tribes, the Amachumni, Kasumni, Holpumni, and Mukulumni to the south, along the Great Sacramento River systems since time immemorial. We understand that this land upon which our institutions are built was once flourishing with natural resources and sustained by the ancestral knowledge and practices of these indigenous communities. We acknowledge the injustices of colonialism and attempted genocide that have impacted these communities and recognize the resilience of their descendants who continue to thrive today. In our daily endeavors, teaching, learning, leadership, and community engagement, we commit to supporting, respecting, and honoring their culture, traditions, and life ways. We pledge to work together for the evolving vision of the Miwok and Nishinan, especially all future generations. Thank you. And if you'll please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. On to the broadcast statement. A broadcast and recording is being made at the direction of the board, and the broadcast may capture images and sounds of those attending the meeting. Folsom Cordova Unified School District Board Policy 1313 promotes mutual respect, civility, and orderly conduct among employees, parents, and the public. We will treat staff, parents, and members of the public with respect and ask the same in return. If any member of the public uses obscenities or communicates in a demanding, loud, insulting, and/or demeaning manner, the board will calmly and politely admonish the person to communicate civilly. Public comments during the board meeting are an important component of public engagement and transparency. Members of the public will not be permitted to yield their speaking time to another member of the public. No public comments were received prior to the board meeting. Per the Brown Act, the board is not allowed to enter into a two-way discussion on any matter not on the agenda. Superintendent, will you call roll?
Sir. Ms. George? Mr. Merrill?
Here.
Mr. Clark?
Here.
Ms. Larrett?
Here.
Ms. Lofthouse?
Here.
Mr. Reed?
Here.
Mr. Huey?
Here.
Please note for the record, Ms. George, student board member, is absent.
Thank you. And on to item 2, adoption of agenda. Do we have a motion to adopt the agenda? Motion by Mr. Clark. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Mr. Reed. Superintendent?
Ms. George? Mr. Merrill?
Aye.
Mr. Clark?
Aye.
Ms. Larrett?
Aye.
Ms. Lofthouse?
Aye.
Mr. Reed?
Aye.
Mr. Huey?
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
Thank you. On to item 3, discussion. Item A, Folsom Cordova Unified School District Board Study Session on Facilities, Part 4. Superintendent, I'll hand it over to you.
Absolutely. I was just going to turn and talk to you without the mic on. Yeah. So, really excited today to have this opportunity to share. I believe this is a part 4 of this really important and engaging conversation that has included in prior parts pretty much all members of the community, and we want to bring this back to the board for a pretty robust, thank you so much, a pretty robust conversation tonight to get board feedback on our current state as it relates to facilities. We have our amazing facilities team is all in the house along with our assistant for business services here, and they have a really amazing presentation. And I'm really hopeful that from today that we're providing a lot of clarity and getting a lot of feedback from the board. I'm going to tee them up. All right. Mr. Martin, are you going to be first on this one?
I'm going to start off the conversation.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
So as Mr. Swanson shared, we have the facility team here. I do want to recognize the team. What you're seeing here is the labor of many months and many board study sessions and board meetings and community engagement conversations with regards to SFID 3, SFID 4 will be the primary areas of focus and conversation this evening. So I just want to recognize the team. We have Jerry, Joanne, and Terry on that side, and Matt and myself on this side. And so we'll be going through this, 87-page presentation. There's lots of pictures, though, so we appreciate that. I know everybody knows we can flip through that relatively quickly. And so what we're going to speak to is, first, we're going to just talk about scope of potentially with SFID 4. As the board is aware, we passed a passed a resolution to put two measures on the ballot that will be happening on November 5th. And so we want to talk a little bit more about that in detail with the board and discuss. We actually have some design and some preliminary information there about the scope of the projects that we're talking about. And then we'll dive into SFID 3 and the development and new construction based off of recommendations from the advisory committee that the board put forward. Their information was provided to the board, but we didn't have an opportunity to really deep dive into those conversations and talk about next steps when it comes to SFID 3. We then also have some information about capacity and funding for district-wide and kind of next steps and making sure that the board understands and is looking forward to what the future holds for us when it comes to facilities within Folsom, Cordova. And so we'll bring it all together at the end. Most of this conversation is going to be with Terry and myself, but the entire team's here to answer any questions. We do also have some educational components in here that were provided by Dr. Huber and his team. We can speak to those at some level, but I do want to share when we start getting and talking about our specialty high school and some of those pieces, those things are just starting to be really analyzed and detailed out. There's a subcommittee within the education services side that is working on structuring and developing those pieces. So we have a kind of a high level overview on that, but we can talk about that more when we get there. So without further ado, let's just talk a little bit about R and S. Board on August 1st took action to place two ballot measures, Measure R and Measure S. Measure R is focused towards elementary schools. Measure S is towards secondary schools. And they are $144 million each. So it would potentially bring in $288 million plus about another $30 million in state funds that would be bringing in funding to our SFID 4, which just for a reminder, I know the board is familiar, but SFID 4 would be more or less our existing Rancho Cordova schools, focused only in that area and not anywhere else in Folsom, Cordova. The next couple of slides are pretty much
Ms.
standard.
Martin, sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
The $30 million in state funds, what exactly does that refer to?
So there are, when schools reach 25 years, they qualify for what is called state modernization funding. And with that, we then get a certain dollar amount based off of the square footage, the number of classrooms, all of those things. There's a lot of formulas. Jerry and Joanne can speak to those if you have specific questions. But that money is potentially available, but it requires normally a match from the school district. And so by accessing these funds by passing measures of R and S, we would then potentially have funds available from the state. Now, that is dependent upon the state passing Proposition, I think it's 2, is the measure that will also be going in November, which is the state ballot measure to pass for the state bond, which I think is about $10 billion. Yes, and probably subsequent. Now, I will share also, we have some pending projects in some of our existing schools elsewhere that we have funding for with that. So it's not just SFID 4 that would benefit by passing of Proposition 2. It would be throughout the school district potentially for funds.
Perfect, thanks.
All right. Continuing on, one of the things we're identifying is the fact that, and we brought to the board with why we're bringing forward specifically bonds associated with SFID 4 is that the Rancho Cordova schools, the previous bonds that had been passed have been fully exhausted, so there isn't really access to any funds to continue the projects that we need to do in our Rancho Cordova schools. And we do know our Rancho Cordova schools are older. They're just older schools, and so we've done modernization projects, but to do all of the scope that we would like to do to get these schools up at the same standard of a new school would require additional dollars. And so that's why we're going forward to our community to enhance our schools in our Rancho Cordova area. Some of the areas that, just so I think you're all aware, but we did a lot of different outreach. We did 2 surveys that were specifically done by a polling company on top of to get data from our community. On top of that, we did a community-wide outreach with regards to just facilities and overall needs of our schools that received over 600 comments and communication, as well as each of those surveys. We met with over a dozen community organizations within the Rancho Cordova area, including the chamber. There was a luncheon opportunity, several different presentations that we provided information to those groups to get feedback from all of those folks. And some of the things that really resonated within our community was obviously safety, teacher retention, having good quality, high quality teachers, but also you see local job training, career training, CTE, STEM type of activities as well. So those were all things that resonated throughout the community input. And so we really prioritizes those items in the information that we provided out to our community and what we're looking at when we go into some of the design work that we're looking at today. And that's what this slide, I jumped ahead a little bit, but that's what talked about here is safety and all of those other areas. So what is the why for some of this conversation tonight was back in October in our study session number 2, we had a conversation about prioritization of Rancho Cordova facilities and what were the whys, right? What did we want our Rancho Cordova schools to look like? What were the facilities needed? And we talked about replacement, completely tearing down and versus modernization, but we saw that cost-wise, replacement would be much greater cost relative versus modernizing our existing campuses, some of those things. And so we identified we wanted also community schools, community hubs in our schools, our campuses to be inviting to our community, but to our students, and having those 21st century opportunities for our staff and our students when they have their classrooms and the setups that they have. And so these are the items that I kind of was speaking to here. Enhanced safety and security, revitalizing the exteriors, improving library, multipurpose areas, the community hubs. Capacity is a big piece because of the expansion of full-day kindergarten and then also expansion of universal transitional kindergarten. We have needs. We are also seeing an increase in special ed needs, other classroom needs when it comes to STEM, other opportunities. And so really we are needing to rehaul and modernize a lot of our campuses to meet those needs. And so you see those here. Secondary, some of the things, all campuses are those first items, but you see elementary was classroom, bathrooms for TK and kindergarten, as well as STEAM and STEM. At secondary, we also identified gymnasiums, the stadium, CTE and career readiness. Those were highlighted areas as well. And then alternative ed programs that we have in the district. Again, we're going to talk a little bit more about that, but maybe more of opportunity, what we're calling like a pathways model, where a student can come in and potentially get college credits, high school credit, job, career growth, independent study, whatever the services they are, but an opportunity to have a kind of an all-encompassing program or opportunity for our students. And so that's something we're talking about with our alternative programs. And that ties into some of the SFID 3 conversations as well. So alt ed, you can see here, we talked about some of this. These are all the alt ed locations we have. Now you will notice that all of our alt ed locations, except for Folsom Lake High, which is at our Folsom High School campus, all of these are actually located on the Rancho Cordova side. And the truth being told is a big reason for that is that is where we had facilities available. And so that's why those programs kind of grew out of those locations. So that's something we also have to recognize is that there's an impact to the Rancho Cordova side in that all of those programs are there. And so that we have to make sure that there's some kind of balance of service and also cost. And so that's why we'll talk a little bit more about the SFID 3 and also future about district-wide bonding, funding, and opportunities there. And to make sure that district-wide services are really supported by all district services and funds. So. And so we'll dive into alt ed a little bit more. So now at this point, I'm going to drop our hand off, I should say, over to Terry, who's going to just kind of talk about some of the scope. Now, a couple of things I'm going to tell you right now. The scope on these projects are enhanced. In fact, in the idea that there's an opportunity here to do a lot on our campuses. We have to understand that a lot of this will be phased. right? Because the funding that we are actually going to be going out to will only cover about half of the project scope we're going to be talking about here. But we wanted to identify all needs so that we have a real understanding of what the long-term direction is and what our priorities are as a district, right? But what that means is some of this will be phased, and some of it will be completed potentially with another bond passage out in future years potentially. So there's going to be multiple steps. So we have to understand that. So you have to kind of take baby steps understanding that process, that, all of it won't happen immediately overnight. The other thing is timing. When we talk about the $288 million that potentially we will have access to if we pass R&S, we won't receive all those funds from day one. Those will be over about an 8 to 10 year window. So projects at all the campuses won't happen immediately. Now, we'll definitely do something so all campuses see some recognition of the funds, but we have to understand that project scope-wise, they are tied to, a lot of times when the state money will qualify, we don't want to finish a project and then not qualify for state funds, right? So we want to make sure that we have the state funding qualifying for the project. So some of those scopes may be out further than other ones. So some of those prioritizations are based upon state money, the need, safety, priorities, all of those different areas, right? So.
Right. And as Sean was saying, these were developed late last year, more on the guise of inspiring, newness to the campus. We looked at what the ed specs were current and what needed to change in the infrastructure to the campuses in order to get them up to where we're at today, the community hub, additional support spaces, et cetera. And so you'll start to see a pattern and somewhat of a level of consistency, especially at the elementary schools, of the types of facilities that we were talking about. And depending on what size the existing spaces are, determines whether there's an addition or a proposed new building. So at Cordova Gardens Academy of Arts and Sciences, the idea is that there will be an expansion to the administration. That original building was originally the admin and the library. We felt that the existing multipurpose was undersized, and so the proposal is to build a new multipurpose and then put the library and the community hub in the multipurpose building that exists. There's also a need for additional TK and K kinder spaces, and so that whole area is being proposed to improve. And then the proposal obviously is that there's work in all of the classrooms that are on the campus, and so providing outdoor collaboration spaces, upgrades to existing classrooms, and some improvements with the bus drop-off. Once we get into meeting with the sites and the community, we'll start to refine the needs to go towards existing classrooms and CTE spaces and all of those. Again, that's why I'm stressing this was just visionary stuff, and we still need to actually vet out the priorities at each site beyond that first task that we've done. Go ahead.
Question. What type of feedback are you going to be looking for? Are you asking or wanting some feedback on each site, or do you want to go through the whole presentation and then get feedback?
What do you prefer, Sean?
Yeah, I think the intent tonight is this is just a high-level scope for the board to discuss.
Okay.
What we want everybody to understand is that what we will actually be doing is having input feedback sessions at each site with the leadership team, teachers for sure, talking about the site specifics. Now, what we're showing you here are the things that we got from that previous, a couple slides ago about kind of our priorities when it came, this slide here. So all the sites were looked at using this list, right? If it's an elementary site, it includes the restrooms and the STEM stuff. At the secondaries, it's these other things. And what the idea was is just looking at our campus now, if we're trying to get these things done, what would that look like scope-wise to the campus? That's as far as the work that was done by the architects. So obviously, yeah, if there's hey, we really need at our campus some additional classrooms for XYZ for students, right? Or to support our teacher staff. If that's something that's identified in a specific campus, we can roll that into the plan for that particular campus. But what we're going over with right now is kind of what we identified based off of this scope. Now, be truthful. These designs and things like this, that may not be what the final design actually is. These were just kind of having an architect give us an idea of what would that potentially look like. And so you're actually going to see as we go through this, we had 3 or 4 different architect firms.
Correct. 4.
Or we had 4 different architect firms. So you're going to see some look similar to others, and then all of a sudden the next designs will look a lot different. And that's because we were just trying to gauge kind of as the architects were working, what each of them were. This is why a pool helps us, right? We can look at it, and then what we can do is ask them go back and work that pencil, right? To work the numbers. And we say, we like this design, we don't like that. Can you come back and work? And that's what we're going to be doing through this process. So I think it's important to recognize that we're not really like right now saying this is what the school is going to look like. But obviously, if you guys have suggestions or ideas or thoughts, I think it's probably better just let us know as we're going along. If there's something like, oh, I know this is a concern on this campus. If you guys have something you'd like to share, we can take that at this point.
Okay, so basically, the board should view this as conceptual and with plenty of time for additional input as the process goes forward.
Yeah.
But to provide some high-level observations.
Yeah, and honestly, when we're looking at this, we're looking at individual campuses because we really wanted, we have the measure RNS out. So we want something people can kind of visualize. But I think it's important to recognize is that the decisions that we are doing right now is more for budgetary purposes rather than the actual design at this point.
Okay.
that good?
And unless we're told otherwise, should we assume that all of the new construction is single-story?
Yeah, unless we identify something that we've shared that we're doing something differently.
There are some two-story.
At the secondary level,
Secondary
there's some
level, there is
multi-story.
Right, but we show that design work.
Okay.
So we'll show it to you when we.
And we're scheduling, and some have already been scheduled, site meetings with the sites to get input from the sites, including all representation from the sites, including, teachers, special programs, classified, all different sections. We ask for parent input, even student input as well to get input on the facility plan too.
Okay. Yeah, I guess a very high-level observation, which kind of carries over for each slide that I'll just share right now, is when we're building new construction, to the degree we can make it cohesive, meaning a single structure rather than a bunch of smaller structures, and use it as in place of a fence. So that's the building is the fence, if you will, with a main entryway. I personally like that style more than just simply, dropping 3 or 4 buildings down on the campus. I guess the 3 or 4 buildings, like for example here, would be consistent with, I guess, the current structure of the campus. But one of the things that we're always hearing from Rancho Cordova is comparison to Folsom, right, wrong, or indifferent. And, I would like to take this opportunity where we can, and I understand that we have limited funds, even with the bond. But I would like to kind of re-envision what we could potentially do with single building architecture, at least for the new buildings that are being built, which might include some internal hallways. Because one of the criticisms that we've had, and one of the reasons why we went with the Alder Creek and Mangini Ranch model, was for safety. And obviously we don't have the money to raise an entire campus here or multiple campuses, but we can still integrate some of the concepts that we have implemented in Folsom in Rancho Cordova too.
And that's one of the factors and concerns we have is making sure that safety and security, single point of entry,
Right.
Those are all factors that are going into some of these, taking the existing design and seeing how we can incorporate some of that. We try to use buildings as much as possible for facing as well and try to minimize fencing. A lot of these sites have fencing, so we're trying to incorporate the existing fencing into the plan as well. And, you've got safety, security, planning, budget, so all that has to kind of mesh together.
It's a balancing act.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say, David, one of the things that we, and you were part of the subcommittee that we did with SFID3, when we were looking at cost as a main component, really the single building with the covered hall, centralized halls, or enclosed halls, that cost increases because of the fact that you're having more or less extra square footage for all those covered hallways, right? And so we really, when we look at the future plans for our schools, for new schools, we are looking at more of a classical campus style because of the fact that that single building where you have all covered hallway, all of it's one built, that actually increases cost.
Well,
So we have to balance that. Do you,
Right.
you understand what I'm saying? there?
Right.
Okay.
Well, for new school sites, I mean, these are existing school sites, but I would like that to be perhaps a board discussion for new school sites if we are going to go back to the California classical design. Well, it's, by the way, the classical design, it depends where it's all relative, it's where you're from. But, you know, we consciously made a decision to go to those single building structures for safety purposes. So I don't want perhaps there just to be a decision without board input to go away from that.
It will,
concept.
and that's something we have further in the presentation. We're
there's
gonna
more on that.
dive into that conversation with you. But I want to be sensitive because what I will say is I wouldn't say that one model is safer than another model. Because what we see is, and we've seen this and I don't really want to go down this avenue too deep, but if you really dive into some of the schools that have had shootings, some of them had state-of-the-art single entry access, closed multiple door lock systems with cards, and those campuses were breached, right? So it really is about, safety comes down to the training of staff. It comes down to the systems and the procedures we have in place, right? And some of those things as well. So I want to balance that conversation because I would hate for someone to think that we're not making as safe of a school, right? What we have to do is understand that it's one piece of many pieces when it comes to the puzzle of trying to protect and make sure we have safe schools for our students.
Yeah, and I guess I wasn't actually thinking about the shooting scenario, but I was thinking about like the bathroom scenario, where right now students in the newer school sites can be excused to go use the restroom without the teacher having to worry about them leaving the classroom, going outside, and potentially making a run for.
Sure.
So it's more self-contained from that standpoint.
I get you. Thank you.
All right, but no, I'm comfortable with the concept that this is all conceptual right now. So it was just an observation that I wanted to share, that where it's possible that we can have single building additions, where it's possible that we can use it as a fronting to the sidewalk or a fronting to the parking lot to avoid additional fencing, to make it look less institutional.
Yeah.
That's just an overarching desire.
Okay.
Thank you.
Very good.
And so you can see by this rendering, again, is just trying to give you an inspirational concept of what a revitalized frontage and entrance into the campus can look like with the addition of the admin. And so looking at this shot, then the kinder would be on the left, the existing multi would be on the right. Here. And there's a shot of the multi. And you'll see from this architect that the idea, again, for cost consciousness is trying to use the same multi-purpose in multiple sites so that there's a level of consistency being provided at all the elementary schools.
So that last image was of a multi-purpose?
Yes.
Okay.
Cordova Meadows, again, identified that the existing administration was large enough that it would be a renovation and trying to make that space more up to par with the programs that are being supported today. The MP was undersized, and so it is also being proposed to have a new MPR. And then you'll see the theme again, TKK, upgrading the playground area and providing additional classroom space. And then the additional note here, the bar on the left side of the screen, there were modular buildings that were where the multi is going, and so those are being proposed to be relocated at this time with new construction. And then again, renovation of the existing spaces that were not touched in the first phase.
And I think that's important to note is that, you know, when we're trying to prioritize some of these components of new buildings, new structures, we won't be able to do everything, right? So we won't be able to go in and rip out every classroom, so we have to prioritize those things, right? Ideally, in a perfect world, we would do it all at one time, but we have to time that with the funding and the priorities of what we have access to. So, but that's where we'll also work with our sites to know what is the highest priority, right? And where those dollars need to go. So,
Yeah, again, this was just a exercise in inspiration from the conversation back in October of how can we make a 1960 school look current, right, from the frontage. That's what the renderings are about. I apologize, there was a printing error on Mather Heights, so the scope legend is not there. This is partly a single building interior circulation space. The MP is adequately sized, so that would be a renovation. The admin is very hard to find and very small, and so the idea is where that 1.2 is in the other building is that the admin would actually be relocated into the other building and expanded so that there is a very easily identified public-facing entrance. And then the rest of those pieces are modernization components for this campus.
And what's 2.3?
That's a great question. 2.3 is the classroom expansion. At one point, we had talked about whether this was going to be expanded for K-8 or not. And so that is something that still needs to be refined, but we were trying to identify where that potentially could go. But I believe since this has been done, that's kind of fallen off the radar. Again, these have kind of been sitting tucked away for a few months.
Okay.
So again, concept here, the multi would take a larger presence because the admin would be pushed to the side, and then having, you know, a facelift again to the frontage of the campus.
So I had a quick question. So back to Mather Heights, are we talking a possibility of a K-8?
I believe that has.
we just wanted to have all options available to us. There were some discussions at one point about, because Mather Heights' enrollment is continuing to decline and that community is getting older, we were trying to think of scenarios or options that are available. So I don't think at this point we're ready. Dr. Huber and his team would need to be involved in some of that presentation discussion. But I do think a future conversation, a future study session will be, what our enrollment projections are at all of our campuses and what are our future plans, right? So this is part of the scope at this point, but once we, bring that information to the board, we will get direction on whether we would want to put a K-8 here as a model of a program. And obviously, if we were to do something like that, we would need to come with, is that going to be an attractor program then? It would need to be. And if so, what is the specialty or what is the program going to be to attract those students to make that campus viable or not as a K-8?
Yeah, I was just curious because I know there's growth, being built out there, but I think they would probably more funnel into Navigator.
Currently,
right?
yeah.
Okay.
Okay, Peter J. Shields. Again, the original multipurpose is one of those modular buildings. There were 3 sites that had them. And so the proposal, again, where 1.4 is actually where the admin is, and it's super buried. And so the concept would be that the original multi gets demolished and a new building for the admin gets put up front and center. So again, there's a public entry and it's obvious as a destination. And then putting the multi on the corner and expanding the parking over there. So that's a bigger concept. For this campus, the parking is very limited and some of the resources are kind of buried within the campus. And then again, adding and expanding the kindergarten and TK play area and classrooms.
I did just want to make a comment on safety. You can see from a lot of these renderings that it looks like we're finally taking some of the admins from the center of the schools and pushing them up front, right? So I think that we're really staying on brand and what our mission is on the safety by moving those from the internal toward the externals and funneling those points with the fencing, you know, because it's like right now the way it is, we're like, we don't want people on campus, but you have no choice but to go on campus with the way that some of our models are. So,
Correct. Yeah.
And we also are trying to make that community hub at that front portion as well, so that as parents come on, they have access to the community services or whatever the need is on that site.
So again, similar multi being implemented here. Oh, only one shot for this one, I believe, yeah. Some of them have more renderings than others. Rancho Cordova Elementary School, this is one that we actually did really early on of a what if could happen. So this is the same concept that was presented to the board previously. It's a new admin kinder building, because the admin again was kind of tucked in, and then renovating the multipurpose and moving a couple of buildings around in order to create the kinder yard. So this one has a different, feel, but I'm sure that you guys remember this one from previous conversations. At Williamson, again, another multi-purpose. The administration is being expanded. The prior multi will be converted into the library. And then there's some renovations, again, to the TK kinder yard. So you start to see the pattern of what these are about. And then again, renovating the spaces that aren't touched in the first phase. So again, having that visual identity and knowing where to enter the campus. Now we get a little bit more revolutionary. There's two sites that have a lot of scope. So you remember the spaceship, and that one's a big one. So the concept here is the spaceship goes, and then there would be the classrooms replaced, the community hub, the library, and the admin placed at the front of the campus, again, using kind of, David, like you were talking about, the building as a barrier. Creating a plaza with the entrance and the play yards in the back. This one is a very known phased scope, so you start to see some thoughts on how that might be accomplished. And then the second phase would be even bigger by getting rid of all the portables that are currently on that south portion, you can see here, and replacing them with more modulars and creating a very harmonious core to the campus and adding the parking to the south. So, and you can see the visual concept for that. Navigator, it's a much newer school. Its primary need is additional TKK space. So the idea is that there's an additional building added to that yard up in the upper left-hand corner. And then updating the playground equipment and some shade structures. Keeping in the same context of the design that was originally installed. Riverview STEM Academy. The MP is undersized, so the idea is that there is an MP being added on the upper right-hand side. The existing MP would be the library, and then the kinder yard and TK spaces will be added onto and expanded in order to size that. And then part of the vision of the campus would be moving the student care to the other side of the parking lot, so it has its own area. This one also had a conversation about being a K-8 with the STEM Academy, and so this is the finished concept of being able to add enough additional classrooms in order to have those secondary grades added to the campus. And some renderings. And then White Rock, again, is one of those schools where the admin is really hidden. And so this is kind of multiple phases. The MP is on the corner in the lower left. It's undersized. And so the idea would be that there's a new MP to go in. Once that MP is in, then that existing building on the south would be demolished. And then again, over on the right, there's TKK improvements being done. And then the library and the admin would move out to the front again, so there's an identity on the corner of the campus. And then additional improvements to classrooms in future phases. And so again, getting a presence out on the front and creating a little interior space. Now we move to the middle schools. And again, similar theme, looking at the multi-purpose, the library, the administrative and teacher support spaces. So the idea would be that the existing admin, kitchen, multi is demolished and reconstructed. And then the media center would be completely modernized and revisioned into different spaces. And then lots of other stuff in the classrooms and stuff to be done in future phases. And so, again, really trying to change the identity of the campus. The admin is two-story on the left. It has some classroom spaces up above, and then the multi on the right.
I think this kind of, David, if you go back to that previous one, you can kind of see how we're using the buildings to make it so that you're not seeing as much fence line, at least at the entryway. Right?
Yeah, and that is the goal, right? You know, even the original buildings on this campus was actually doing a pretty good job of that, but it is trying to emphasize that use of the building as barrier.
With that roof line, are we to assume that's a two-story
Yes.
on both sides?
Well, the multi has a higher volume for basketball, so it's usually about a story and a half. So
Okay.
Yeah. Mitchell Middle School. The admin is actually on the front, but the entrance is actually on the back side of the building. So the idea was to demolish that building and reconfigure it so that it has presence to the street. The multi is undersized, but it's a little difficult to kind of fit something in. So the idea is that you're actually, removing the building that's in the middle of the cluster. You can see the south cluster compared to the north cluster, and then actually building it larger, expanding it out to be an adequate size multi-purpose, expanding the science labs. These classrooms never really had lab size spaces, and so getting some more lab spaces on that campus was a priority. Starting to identify CTE programs that could be enhanced. Again, those will happen with conversations with the site and ed staff. And then SPED improvements and classroom improvements, and then kind of an idea of what the front could look like. And then having the back be student-focused instead of the front. And then Cordova High School. So this is also kind of big ideas here. The admin currently is the one that's labeled 5. The label 3 was where C Wing was, and the idea is that the existing C Wing would be demolished and the administration would move up front with an upstairs library and enough classrooms to replace C Wing, giving it a front and center identity, as well as taking the counseling registrar and all the spaces that are over in D Wing and consolidating them back all into one admin. So that is a 2-story building. Project 2 is the improvements to the stadium, getting a new entry, concession, ticket booth, again, to start having that separation between visitors and home, like the other campuses, a new press box, and again, having a more I want to say front door entrance to the stadium, because back in the day, you had to go through the park, right? We keep making improvements there. And then I kind of skimmed over on all the other campuses, but one of the proposed ideas is getting the windows replaced on all of this classroom buildings in the first part of it as well. So that's project 3. And then project 4 is the CT and readiness programs as part of the measures. And then the kind of the vision, it would be a dual entry admin to be able to be seen from both parking areas, and then having an entrance and the library.
Can you go back to the site map for a second?
I can.
So I know it's all conceptual right now, but where building number 3, the admin and library, is located, do we know how many of those large trees would have to be removed for that location?
I could not tell you off the top of my head, but a few, yes.
One of the questions that I have on this placement, hypothetically, is was there any discussion about, instead of placing it there and demolishing, what's that, C wing, moving it over to, basically sliding it over to the parking lot and demolishing building, what's that wing, where 11 is?
That's that's B wing.
B-wing. Any conversation of sliding that building over and building it where the B-wing is so that it's facing where the majority of the parking is, rather than putting it in between 2 parking lots where you have a further distance to get to the gateway, if you will, into the campus? That would potentially also saving those very large trees from.
Well, we did not have that discussion. I think the original concept there is looking at Gates, the keynote 6, right, is embracing that there are 2 larger parking lots existing and having entrance to both sides for students, but then having the admin, which is really right where the number 3 is having also, again, access from both parking lots as the gateway into the campus. If you push it over towards where B-wing is, it's going to be further removed from that right-hand parking lot. But, I mean, it's certainly something we can have a conversation about, but that was the driving thought behind this, is trying to balance some of those existing amenities that exist.
And you said that would be a 2-story building?
It is a 2-story building, yeah. Okay. So, yeah, you can see the upstairs is the library and the downstairs is the admin, and then there's some classrooms as well.
If we can just talk about the trees.
Yeah, the trees are a big deal. I understand.
Yeah. I mean, I know the community really wants it, but if we take those trees down, that's going to be a big, big problem with the community. So as much as we can try to work around and really mitigate not taking out the trees, I mean, there's some trees that it's mostly those redwoods. I mean, I don't think the other trees are quite as precious as the redwoods are, but I mean, I could potentially see people chaining themselves to trees, kind of a situation. So,
I mean, and I do see on number 1, like number 1 listed was maintain as many trees. So I think that it is probably save mature trees, maintain the field. Right. So I think it probably is a priority, just that it's given number 1. But I mean, I would chain myself to a big giant tree too myself. So.
just as we're having those discussions.
No, completely understand. We always
It's conceptual.
It's conceptual.
What we will say to
I do
anybody in the
love that they
public,
put number 1
that
note
we will
as-
definitely analyze all of that
That was a
during
good
that
catch,
process.
that number 1 was actually maintain as many trees as possible.
Correct. If you go back to the 2-story,
Yep.
I just wanted to comment that if you look at the little photo, it's the group from The Office. So I thought that was, I don't know. I keep telling everybody I want our faces on the visual people, because they pick random people. Why can't they use our faces? I feel like that would make it more fun. But anyway.
Surprise, some of the things we
I did have a question. You were talking about reworking the fencing. Did I see that on one of the slides? I mean,
Well, with the building changing, there's reworking of the fencing.
Yeah, we knew that was going to happen.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
one of those, cart before the horses.
I have a question really quick in terms of like noise level and I guess it would be more of the administration at Cordova High School, whether or not having the library upstairs as well as classrooms, given some of the situations that do happen in the office. I don't know, at least in that rendering, how open that is, if that would be potentially a problem. Having students in and out of the office constantly going, if it is the same entrance and exit and things like that, just
Yeah, and it's
potentially
just-
could cause some concern.
It's a concept, we had lots of conversations when we were doing that student union space for Vista Del Lago and trying to keep that separation from students and public and discipline versus career growth. And so those conversations would have to happen. There are no floor plans. There are no, oh, this space is going here or here. These are really high level, pretty pictures. And so then again, keeping with the context of the original gymnasium vibe is creating the grand entrance into the stadium.
Thanks.
And then adding a lobby to the main gym on the north side by the parking so that there is a good entrance, obvious entrance into the existing gymnasium.
Only if we can keep the existing trophy case, right, Jen?
And then a future project was kind of addressing the other round building in the district, and that's the cafeteria. This would be in the future, but creating a student union and a kind of a hub for the high school in that location with an outdoor dining area. So that's kind of high level, big picture concepts, get people excited. Are you gonna take over?
I want to take a minute to thank Terry and the entire team, but just coordination of having multiple I've only had single architects in all my previous jobs, and I've always laid them off, fired them at some point or another. So now we have 4 or 5. So managing that many is even more. Hey, they're contractors, they're employed, they make money, don't worry. But but I would like to just recognize the work on that. You had multiple multiple architects doing these different designs here. So that we're getting a feel of kind of their scope and work, and they're having an opportunity to get into the district and see what is Folsom Cordova and kind of what our campuses are like and what we're trying to do.
And that's one of the reasons why I left. The diversity of formatting and design as is, just so you guys can see the flavor of how 4 different firms work.
So when we get into the scope on this, so that the scope that we have there is in excess of it's going to get close to $600 million. With that, now you see a lot of notes here with regards to when the funds are available, priority, scope, cost, all of these different things you can see here are broken down into that. The $321 million of the bond scope, that's that $288 million plus some developer fees and then also state matching money. So that's how we get up to the $320 million. So I want to recognize Chris Hyatt from Keygent and Terry. They worked together, Jerry, Joanne, they all work on the numbers together to help us generate these things. It's not easy to even put an estimate on something is very, very difficult, right? And then you have to escalate it, and you have to do all of these things with it. And so these are the numbers, as best we can assume with the factors we know right now. And the next one is, and Terry,
Sean,
yeah.
on that, you had indicated on facilities that are 25 years and older, there's the potential of having some matching. Is that at all incorporated into this?
It is. In that $321 million number, that scope there of the projects we can do, that incorporates the $288 million plus some developer fee money, and then state money as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, you got it. And so here, and this is just a very, again, I want to take this with the same as the designs, But what we're trying to do here is kind of provide an understanding of what the timelines are to really do these kind of projects. And if you notice, these go out till what, 2035? And so you're talking the next 10 years for measures R and S. And so some of these projects, you've seen that Mills is pushed out into 2030 before we even start design work on that. And the reason for that is, again, some of it is based off of timing of when we have enough dollars, right, between either the bond sale. You can see where we're selling bonds. You see those yellows, bond sale. We can't sell it all, so we have to sell it in chunks. Also, it's whether or not the school site qualifies for state funding or not, when it would fall into qualification so that we maximize the funding. And so some of those, a lot of those things were driving this schedule. Now, that's not to say that we won't try to do some projects on every camp. Like I think windows is a common area of, really that can kind of clean up a lot of your campuses just by updating your windows. So maybe that will be a project when we actually finalize everything that we'll do on all campuses. But knowing that, similar like the fence situation, we may do that on a campus that in 8 years, we're gonna have to pull those windows out, or, so we need to balance that. Do we wanna do that work then, or do we wanna wait? Because we don't wanna tear out, something that we have to do twice. So those are the things we have to recognize as well, based off of the timing on these projects and scope. And so, you get some benefit immediately versus long-term benefit on other things. So that's something we have to always balance as well when we're doing all of these activities.
Sean, on the Folsom elementary schools, at least the more recent builds, we have been building capacity that could conceptually hit 700 students. Many of the facilities, will definitely fit 500 to 700, if you will. These facilities, elementary schools in Rancho Cordova, were built in a different time, where they were built small. They built more elementary school campuses. If we were to build these campuses today, instead of having 11 elementary schools, we may only have 8. But we are working on the current, the current infrastructure that we have. But when you look at the current enrollment at these schools, Cordova Gardens has 275 students. Cordova Meadows has 389. Cordova Villa has 495. Mather has 228. Shields has 327. Rancho Cordova Elementary has 418. Riverview has 357. White Rock has 404. Williamson is actually the largest at 510, and Navigator is at 414. Is the goal with these renovations and enhancements and additions to increase capacity at any of the sites to take it higher than what the site currently holds in the number of students? And by doing so, is there, I guess, probably a future conversation, not for now, but is there some cost efficiencies? I mean, having one less principal or two less principals and administrative staff allows us to be able to redirect funds more towards education, which is the mission of the district, rather than, senior level administrators. Is that a conversation going on in the background? Obviously, it's all conceptual right now.
Yeah, can of worms, right? What I would say is yes. I think the question you have about efficiencies and sizing of our campuses is an appropriate conversation to be had. And obviously that changes the need and the timeline on campuses. Okay. And so if the board is wanting us to start that conversation now, I would say that there would be benefit to it, but I would also say there is impacts to that conversation publicly when you're still trying to go out for a bond to support all of our schools.
Yeah, right? I mean, obviously, everybody has their hands full right now.
Right.
But I think that conversation at some point in the next 6 months needs to take place.
That's a fair request. I think we can do that post-November to have that level of conversation as well about I think one of the things I did talk about at the beginning was what is our projection enrollments at these campuses? Are they sustainable long-term? We were talking about that specifically with Mather Heights. So I think that's a fair ask or question of us by the board. And so if that's a direction the board would like us to look at as well, we can include that in our scoping when we're doing our next level analysis.
Yeah, I just want to avoid a situation where we potentially waste public taxpayer funds. And what I mean by that is, I'm familiar with a school district that probably spent, they probably spent $15 million to renovate and add on to onto an older facility. And within 10 years, they closed the facility because of declining enrollment. I think we have the level and sophistication to look into the future to a certain degree and make sure we don't spend money in a facility that might not be around in 20 years. Because again, these are taxpayer dollars and we want to spend it in the most efficient way possible. But that's what I'm hearing right now, that this is a conversation.
Yeah, I mean, at a very high level, we've had those conversations.
Okay.
Anything of that nature would require multiple conversations, not just with the board, but with community and all of those pieces. And so that would be something that we can definitely incorporate, at least start some of those conversations when we do our next level of analysis.
Okay, thank you.
So.
I do think, though, Mystery, that the last time we had that conversation, the board pretty clearly said, we're not wanting to consolidate any schools.
I don't know if that was a definitive answer. We had one city council member that expressed concern, but I've probably heard from a majority of city council members who had differing opinions.
Yeah, my recollection of this board's conversation was that we're keeping that community schools model in the smaller school sizes. I remember that coming up. I think it's worth having that conversation at some point, but.
Maybe I completely forgot about that, but did we give that direction?
It's on slide 8 as well, on the October 9th, 2023 board study session. It was discussed that replacement school options were not viable and not in support of the community neighborhood school model.
Well, I think when we were saying replacement school option, that was where we were going to tear down the whole campus and replace it with a new campus.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think that's what that terminology specifically meant.
Okay.
The board definitely has said that they are in support of community schools. I definitely have heard that, but I don't know if we've gotten any specific request for information about potential consolidation of campuses or any of those kind of things. But again, the timing on that is something we want to weigh as well.
Right.
Well, I think too, with the timeline being over a 10-year process, we can probably identify those sites specifically where we have high volume of students already, and we'll work on those while we maybe have that discussion and look and see what trends are over the next, decade or so.
Right.
So I don't know that it's like a super pressing conversation for us to have kind of immediately.
Right.
So.
No, that's an excellent point, and I think those timelines definitely have some flexibility in them as well.
And just to go back to that slide, that clarification, it was when we were having a conversation of doing, maybe 3 750 plus campuses and closing several schools in order to get the bigger model, in order to conserve costs. And that was like, no, we want the community school concept.
I don't think we ever voted on that.
No. I'm talking about the meeting and what was discussed.
Okay.
There was no
All right.
decision made. No decision made.
All right, okay.
Okay, so this is just an example of a potential timeline, though. So where we are at this point with SFID 4, as we talked about, the board has put 2 measures on the ballot. We are continuing through some of these processes. I don't know, Matt, Jerry, Terry, you guys want to talk about? I know you shared already. We're already scheduling some meetings with our school sites and starting those conversations.
Yes, we reached out to all the school sites and about them forming modernization committees to comprise a representation of their school site, to get good representation from the different programs, teachers, even parents, students, classified, all different aspects of it, so we can have some input and get feedback on the plans from each of that. And then from that point, we'll do further reach out. We'll probably, you can have community forums or whatever to try to present these plans and get more community feedback as well.
And then, so if when is more positive, measure R&S passes, then we would definitely need to be having some additional meetings, detailed meetings with those groups, but then also some additional board conversations about really prioritizing and project scope and coming with more concrete numbers. So it would be this, but much more specific and talking about scope. And then based off of, if the board agrees with Board Trustee Reed, that would be something you want to include, we can also then look at some other scenarios with regards to what options we have available. Obviously, if you're looking at consolidation or expansion on some campuses, that then opens up a whole nother conversation about what those other campuses are used for, and a lot of activities in that area, so.
Well, and then the other thing that's happening kind of in tandem is the comprehensive facility plan district-wide. And so these things need to dovetail together to make sure that there's consistency between those two processes.
And so the reason why we want to do that is, and we're kind of stepping ahead, but I think the board is aware that we are also talking about long-term looking at going to district-wide bonding measures instead of SFID oriented, which then means we need to make sure that the project scopes that we have for SFID 4, as she was saying, dovetail or align with our overall district facility master plan, right? And so there's a lot of balls in the air with all of these different pieces for sure. But I think our first big piece was to provide this kind of high-level overview, and that way the board had an opportunity to review and look at it before we get out to the general public, which we hope to do here in the next couple of weeks, it sounds like, and going into October, which coincides times very well with conversations about Measure R and S. And then we all hands on board for our November 5th election cycle, and then we'll go from there. So any questions that we can provide on SFID 4 before we move over to SFID 3?
Yeah,
David.
on slide 65.
Yeah.
I think it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like the fact how Cordova High is out of the gate priority. I appreciate that. I also appreciate the fact that both Rancho Cordova Elementary School and Cordova Villa is front-loaded, largely because they are two of the more populated schools at 495 and 418. I do question why Williamson is pushed off so far, hypothetically, given that it's the most populous school at 510. But I also, and I guess I'd love to get the perspective of my fellow board members. One of the schools that is just going gangbusters, that people within the district, within Rancho Cordova, outside of the district want to attend is Riverview STEM. And that seems like a wonderful opportunity to majorly enhance capacity and grow that school. And so I guess with that one, I'm questioning, if we don't potentially consider moving that up in the time frame.
Some of these schools obviously are planned around state eligibility and funding, so we want to maximize our funding efforts as well.
Yeah.
Some of the, Riverview is up further, although some of that is unfunded scope, so we would have to look at some of the other projects as well if we're going to take some of the scope from that to move some of that to expand capacity. So we'd have to look at some of those as well.
And I would just add, in addition to, you don't want to do the school before modernization eligibility is available, but based on doing 4 bond sales of $144 million incrementally, you're about $36 million per issuance. And so Williamson, White Rock, Villa are larger visionary projects with larger dollars. And so part of this was just spreading out cash flow as an example of how it could be done. But again, if there is a change from the board on, prioritization of projects, this was just a first pass based on when they're eligible, what are known priorities already, and what is the value of the work, and how do you make sure you have enough money to do it?
Now, that makes sense that you're trying to time it for state matching funds. And that makes sense if the more expensive projects are potentially a little bit later, because correct me if I'm wrong, if we institute a district-wide bond in the next, let's say, 5 years, some of that bond funds would also be able to go to these facilities as well. So you would be able to take measure, if we're talking about elementary, or R is elementary, right?
Yes.
So you would be able to marry some R funds with some future district-wide bond funds plus state matching, and then you would probably be able to do some of those larger projects. Is that correct?
Correct, and also, we're getting into the weeds a little bit, but 2032, we also have some bonds falling off that we would have access to, some existing SFID4 bond funding that could then help facilitate too.
Okay, no, that all makes sense. Thank you.
We've got it all in our heads and on several spreadsheets.
No,
So-
and note number 4 is really important too.
Yeah, one of the things we talked about is there's some financing opportunities there where we could accelerate the timeline. Anytime you can accelerate the funds, we would want to do that just because cost, remember, the dollar amount we're getting on the bonds, the 144 million times 2, that's static. But the cost for construction continues to grow. So that 144 million every year you wait, present value of money, right? It's worth more today than it is tomorrow if you can get the project done. So we would want to look at that as well. So next steps, we've talked about that. We just wanted to get from the board somewhat of a direction or consensus is if they're feeling comfortable with where we are going, that we've encapsulated kind of what we want to do going forward for SFID4. Again, understanding that a lot of these details are still fuzzy. We're going to fine tune these things, bring these things into more of a detailed scope as we move along in the process here. But conceptually, this is what we want to do with RNS. This is what we're going to tell the community our priorities and plans are with RNS, aligned with whatever the individual school sites bring as priorities on their individual campuses. But we're trying to using this as a model to standardize across our campuses, right? As what our expectations are for a Folsom Cordova school, right?
That's good. Well, knowing that it's a projection, and we'll have some more time to talk about this once we know about RNS post November 5th. So with what we have now, then any concerns from the board in terms of the proposed plan?
I just think for me, when I look at it, my only concern is it's a lot of forward facing, which I know that's what we're wanting. Like we want to make the campuses pretty. But my concern is I'm not seeing much in terms of like, how is this going to improve students' education? Or how is this going to improve the business of our business, which is how are we going to elevate what's happening in the classrooms or around the campus for the students? And for me, I want that to be the forefront or the priority. And I know my multi-purpose rooms are great for the community, but I don't want all the money to go into prettying places that the students don't get to be a part of. So that's my only concern with what I'm seeing is it's very forward facing and not so much for the students. And that's where my concern is.
And that's why I tried to put it in perspective. If this was an exercise just about image and forward facing at that, as the surveys went out and the bond language was developed, that there's this whole layer of additional needs and ideas that still need to be reconciled.
Yeah, so.
And I agree with Kara on that. We want these campuses to look nice, yes, absolutely. And so the community is proud of each facility. But I think that's also the problem is when you have limited funds and you try to spread them so thin, there's not as much you can do. I think you can get more grand in scale and ensure that you have brand new classrooms and education facilities if we were more targeted. But again, that's a future conversation. But I did recognize that point. That's a very good point. The other thing that I guess just overarching is I think you probably have 5 board members here that are very interested in how this is going to play out and how this is going to look. And I guess I would just maybe encourage staff not to go so far down the path in any particular direction without checking back in with the board. Sometimes after having meetings with staff, with the community, and then with the architects, and the board sometimes is the last to know what's going on. And sometimes, we've had scenarios where, the answer is, well, we kind of are past that point in the process. It would be good to keep the board more actively in the loop on the facilities and the projects and the concepts.
We hear you. And what I would speak to is this is study session number 4. So hopefully that shows our interest in including the board in all of those decision-making components, so.
And I think equal to that is ensuring that while we think we might know what's best for a school campus, we probably don't. And it's the people that foot on the ground in the campuses know what their specific campus needs or where those priorities are, which I hear you, and we're going to form those groups, but really ensuring that those voices are elevated and heard over city council, school board members, administration, even making sure that those voices are the ones. What do the students need? What do the teachers need? What do the people that are working on those individual campuses know from day in, day out where those needs are? We might think that they need a bathroom somewhere where they're like, no, we do not need a bathroom in that corner. We need a bathroom in this corner. So just really ensuring and across the board, because teachers are exhausted. So signing up for another meeting or another group to meet with is hard. So maybe getting into those staff meetings and kind of hearing from full staff at a time where their already attention is in a place, rather than just getting the couple volunteers that can go to the meeting at that specific time. So just making sure that those voices really are heard on the site levels.
Could we also potentially avoid trying to be groundbreaking in new facility designs and concepts, because they tend to be very expensive? Every time I go over to Alder Creek or Manjani Ranch and I see these glass walls that are designed to open and close, and I have yet to be over there during a school day to see one of those glass walls open and using it for the purpose that it was designed for. In fact, I've heard these glass walls getting stuck, not being able to open, not able to be able to close them, needing to be repaired. I know it was the hot trend, but sometimes we shouldn't be chasing the hot trends because it is just a trend. And sometimes just, building buildings without chasing the hot trend is more affordable. I know architects love to, have shiny new examples to win awards from, but we don't need these awards for new designs and structures and, these huge, open areas and roof lines and bells and whistles. We need to stretch these dollars as far as we can to enhance the facility and the education that we provide on those facilities. So if we could try to resist that would be great.
Yeah, budget consciousness is something that is one of our highest priorities on our site. So we definitely agree with that concept.
I did have a question, and this is more of construction-wise and traffic studies or EIRs. When does those come into play?
We have to do CEQA for all projects, so we will be doing our CEQA documents with them. Most of these would be, exemption, but if there's specific issues that come to play, we do special studies for that too.
I mean, because I'm thinking that'll probably come up in community discussions about traffic and what that would look like.
Especially during construction, those are the mitigation measures that we have to put into place when we
Right.
do that. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else for SFID 4?
I was just going to say, I appreciate you guys making the windows a high priority, because I know that was something that was on our last bond scope that we just couldn't fund out of that. So I appreciate that kind of goes to the top of the list, because I know in many classes we go in, windows are kind of a big issue. So I would just stress that if we can kind of look at anything that wasn't covered, that we kind of had committed to in the last bond that wasn't taken care of, if we can kind of prioritize those to the tops of the list. And I also appreciate the replacement of the some of the buildings, the classroom buildings that are the portables, because a lot of times those are a lot of the classrooms that are having the biggest issues. So prioritizing those. And then I do appreciate the admin buildings from the middle of the campuses to the front. So I think those are, as far as a customer service from a parent, I mean, I don't know how many campuses I've been on. I'm like, I really can't find the office, or the library, places where, you have adults that need to be in those spaces quite a bit. So I appreciate you guys prioritizing those items.
Great. I mean, so what I'm hearing is we definitely will have more questions.
Okay.
And want to be updated on the process and understand that this was a projection, just to give us a sense of the scope of the work and what type of budget we'd be looking at.
Yep.
Nothing set in stone on this. So it sounds like after November, we may be having a lot more
We're gonna
conversations
go,
around the details, but
For sure.
before ground's broken on anything, this board will get a good chance to weigh in.
Yes, for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, well, if you guys are ready, we'll jump into SFID 3 unless you want to take a break. Are you guys good?
Good.
Good? Okay. All right, so we already brought this information to the board as information items and discussion, but we really wanted to start here when we're talking about SFID 3 because the subcommittee that the board created, which had representatives from both sides of Folsom Cordova's boundaries within SFID 3, more or less Rancho Cordova and Folsom, they were all involved along with two of our board members and student board members. Thanks, Van. And so there were three specific questions that were put before the board, or from the board to the committee. And all three items were discussed. And one was the Measure M and the tax rates. One was how do we find an equitable distribution of Measure M? And then location for our first school, first comprehensive high school of 2. And so with the first question, we did get an agreement that continuing issuance of Measure M with a tax rate that would potentially get into the $500-600 per $100,000 assessed value was untenable, and that we needed to find another solution. One of the things, though, that I think the committee was willing to have flexibility on is accessing those funds maybe at a later date once assessed value grows to a level that tax rates can be held at a reasonable level, and also to potentially use some of those dollars to find some ability to balance between the two communities with regards to equitable distribution of Measure M, which is the second question. And so one of the things the committee also agreed is when we're looking at the I created some formulaic methodologies just to give some examples. And one of the things that the committee did agree is that the unincorporated areas did not need to be included in that allocation at this point. They're so far out into the future that it didn't seem impactful to do that. And so, but what we did come up with is that there was definitely some Measure M dollars that needed to get allocated to more or less the community on the western portion of the district, the Rio de Oro development area, is one of the areas that I think everybody agreed to, that there should be some equitable allocation for that. On question number 3, it was agreed by the group consensus that the first comprehensive high school really needed to be focused on the eastern section of the district because of the development in the Folsom Ranch area and the growth numbers that we are looking at enrollment-wise. It really felt appropriate that that's where that school needs to be located. But the committee agreed that at the same time that is occurring, that we have an opportunity to use proceeds of SFID 3 to look at creating a specialty high school that would be focused on the Rancho Cordova side or on the western side of the campus, so that we're having an opportunity for new development, new building construction on both sides, and that we would make sure that everybody in SFID 3 has an opportunity to go to either campus. If they're funding the projects necessary to fund the schools there, they should have an ability to access that. Additionally, there was some recognition on our campuses with regards to plaques and some other activities, noting that even though you have a school on one side or the other side of the district, it really comes from the entire community, and recognizing that fact, which I thought was very nice. And another big one was that they felt like the naming of our schools should not include the specific names of either of our cities. Really, it should be something that is community focused more than a city focused name, which I thought was a nice idea as well. So, and so again, using terminology like southeast, southwest, the district rather than Rancho Cordova or Folsom, trying to mitigate that as much as possible. So I thought that was really a good thought as well. So where we are at this point with SFID 3 is we have students that need places to go. And so we looked at a couple of things. So one of the biggest issues obviously is we have a situation where we have a need for students, but the growth and the cost associated with the new construction it just ballooned on us, right? It mushroomed in the last 5 to 10 years here in construction costs. And so campuses are, twice what they once were. And so we are in a position where we have to figure out other solutions to be able to fund the construction that needs to be happening in the next 10 years. So some of the things we talked about is one is we need to reduce cost on our design as much as possible. Now, the problem we have is we're chasing our tail, because as we reduce cost continues to increase just because of escalation and growth of building material costs, everything else that happens, escalation that occurs. So, best case scenario is we can do enough that we not only keep the cost the same, but we can actually lower cost, which that's a significant task for sure. But one of the things we talked about is in our designs, how do we want to design and I think Trustee Reed brought up a conversation about how are we designing our campuses. And so some of the things we talked about is, can we go from different models? So there is a kind of what we're currently building versus a value engineered model versus an economic or economy model, right? An economy model would be what we would consider an all modular type of model. Value engineering is a kind of some modular components, some design reductions, some other activities that we can do from our current design that's kind of in between. And what we heard from the committee, at least, is that they felt like that middle road is kind of where we want to go. They kind of, several committee members spoke to, can we just build the schools like we used to build the schools? And so I'm assuming that's kind of some of our newer, so like the Navigators or the Russell Ranches of the world, or some of those campuses, right? I think that's kind of what the committee at least was speaking back to. And that's what we were talking about, is that's going back towards more of a classic model, which would be more of your campus style, where you have wings that are not enclosed as one area.
I just wonder, was the design for Mangini Ranch and Alder Creek just over the top? Meaning, yes, it was a single building structure. Yes, it was 2 stories. Yes, it had a lot of bells and whistles. But I don't think that necessarily means you can't build a single building structure affordably. I think you can. We just chose not to. There are districts across this country that build single building structures very affordable for much less than what we paid for Mangini Ranch and Alder Creek. I think the answer is it's possible. So, I always like to talk about the pendulum. I mean, there is an in-between.
Right, no, for sure. But the very first thing I would say is I would never compare California to other states for a lot of things, and school building is one of them. So I would never say that the dollar amount that someone was able to build a school in Utah,
right,
or even on the East Coast, is comparable to what we have to pay in California, right? For example, just for what you said, just because of the property value before you even start the design or anything else. So, but what I will tell you is all things being equal, if you build a campus that is enclosed, that is a 2-story, versus a campus that is more of a traditional model, a winged model with open walkway areas, it's going to be more expensive. Can you do it cheaper than Alder Creek or Mangini? Definitely. But I don't know if we're at the dollar amounts that we're having to hit with the number of schools that we have to build. I think, yes, you could do that design and say, I'm making up numbers here, right? Say it ends up being $8 million more to build that school than a design. The issue we have is we have how many more? 20 more schools to build. Mm-hmm. So at 8 million times 20 schools, that's a lot of money, right?
Well, I guess,
and that's the thing is I will tell you that when we actually look at the cash flow components, it's very, very, very tight. And so I think we have to be hopefully we don't have to go to an all modular solution. I would like to do some value engineering, middle ground. But I think, and we can definitely, if it's the purview of the board, you want us to design up both and give you a very specific cost analysis of each option and what you gained from each, with bells and whistles removed, 2-story, all enclosed campus. But anytime you're going to cover and enclose hallways, it's square footage, and that's the driver that's the number one driver of cost, is total square footage. That you're building. And that's what it comes down to a lot of times.
Yeah, and I'm more concerned, when I talk about a single building, I'm more concerned about the elementary level than I am the middle and the high. It's really the little guys that I'm worried about. But even if, all right, I get your point on the cost of construction, the cost of property in California. But certainly we have many examples in California that have built single building structures. Granted, it wasn't the historical trend, but we do have a number of districts that are building single buildings more affordably. Maybe we could figure out how they're doing it.
Yeah.
We're doing this now. We're actually challenging our architects to come in, meet our educational program, our educational concept, and cut at least 20% or more off the traditional design using existing design, using modified design, using modular so we are doing exactly what you're talking about now to try to do that and try to build it more efficiently. And whether that's part 2-story components, or it's single building, multiple, that's kind of the exercise we're going through to see what we can do and still maintain that, because we still want to have a good, safe building, but have it much more efficient than what we maybe have had in the past. And we've had to, because the previous design was affordable at the time.
Yeah.
It's not anymore.
Yeah. And single building doesn't always need to be 2 floors either. I guess, just if we have the ability to consider, multiple options. Maybe,
what we're doing.
Yeah. And maybe ultimately, the board does decide that we just want to go back to the navigator model, the Sandra J. Gallardo model. That might be where we end up going. But it would be nice if we just make, an informed decision to do that.
For sure, and we can provide that information. I want to say we have to do it early enough in the process, though, so that we're not going down multiple paths, right? We want to focus all of our energy towards one direction. So I think that's something we can work towards, and maybe for the next discussion is dive into really what the cost difference would be between those two, or at least the delta of the difference as a percentage. If the school is going to, if one design over the other is a 10, 15% markup over difference between the 1 and 2 for the same amount of square footage, we can provide that to you. And it's whether or not, when you're talking about $60 million, it's $6 million a campus, that starts adding up very quickly. It eats away. So,
is it correct to assume that the goal is to, for example, at the elementary level for the new school sites, to have a concept or that we then replicate at each location rather than redesign for each location? Is that the goal?
Absolutely. Reuse of plans always saves multiple. It saves in planning costs. It saves in time, schedule, and reuse of plans. It also can save in construction and knowing some of the things. So there are some advantages of it. Obviously, construction costs are construction costs and square foot costs are square foot costs, but there are some efficiencies in it.
Excellent. All right. Thanks.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I appreciate giving us the different models, but I also am also very conscious that we spent millions of dollars on plans that we have not or are going to have to modify. And I just want to make sure that, if we could do a delta, maybe that's the best way for us to go, so that we're not spending so much money with consultants and architects and things like that, that we're just literally, to get to the right answer, we've spent millions on those costs, because we've already kind of had that already happen to us. And I just, as much as I want to be conscious of all the pricing and everything like that, though, too, that once we kind of get it settled, I kind of feel like we need to be settled, and then we need to just kind of continue with that and not keep having to go back, because every single time we have to go back to the architects, it's costing us thousands of dollars. So, I think once we can kind of decide on a single or whatever we're going to do, and we can get that kind of nailed down, we need to I would just hope that I could count on the board members to that's what we commit to, and we just go with that, because every single time we have to keep going back, it's just costing us so much money. So
appreciate that. Okay, and so where we are at this point is, as Matt just spoke to, we have the architect pool working on some, using reuse of some of our existing plans, some other plans, and trying to again, cut costs, as much as possible. September 12th, has come and gone, but the plans at this point, we're starting to review those. And so we'll be bringing that back for discussion here. You want to talk a little more?
Yeah, since we've already received the submissions, there is a mixture of campus style and proposed single building options in the portfolio to review and discuss. So we are seeing the full spectrum.
All right. And so you do see our elementary, we're looking for a 28 opening for our next elementary. And that's the timeline that we're looking at for our enrollment.
Which elementary would that be?
That would be our third elementary on the southeast, south of Highway 50 area. I don't know what
Are we looking at
by
the,
slice pizza. I don't know.
are we looking, Matt, are we looking at the one on the top of the hill or the one near the village that they're building?
We're looking one closer to the east side, not up on the top of the hill.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So high school, middle school, we're looking at a 29 for a first phase. Please keep in mind on the secondary schools, we're definitely talking about phasing on all of these. So we've talked about some pieces to reduce cost. One is we're going to try to, as best as we can, duplicate the model of the school on both sides of the district and south of Highway 50. We are trying to use the Mather Morrison model as kind of a bridge template structure, keeping in mind that those design plans are 20 years old. And so we're having to update that just to meet all of the state requirements, right? Department of State Architects and code and all of those things. That's just one piece of it. Then, of course, all of the upgrades, Title 24, what's the...
Yeah, all electric.
All the electricity, we have to have low voltage, all of those things. So regardless, if we were to just take those plans and slap them down, we would still have a lot of updating. But on top of that, we have a unique situation where we are still working with the developer and on the eastern side of the district with regards to land acquisition, right? And so we knew the original land that we had available to us was not large enough to accommodate our needs. So we are working some very preliminary conversations. Just so you know, we're planning to bring in some real estate experts and some other folks who can help us with that. That is not an area of our expertise, and we need to negotiate and get the best price we can and make sure that the land we acquire is land we can use. Because there is some setbacks and some other things that won't make that usable for us. And at $800,000 to $1 million an acre, we don't want to be buying land that we can't use, right? So we want to have a good relationship and be good neighbors with our developers in that process. Smile. Twing. And so some other things we plan to do is obviously continue to proceed with the design based off of that, unless the board has any concerns about that. We did recently go to Clovis and Sanger and looked at the models where they had a high school, middle school on the same campus. I think at the end of the day, we had our ed services team there. We had a board member with us and some of our principals, some of our other staff. And what we felt like is that is a model that is a doable model. We see it being successful. And so I think that is the direction we are planning to design, unless the board has any input at this point or any concerns. I want to share that the Mather Morrison design went through multiple community input, feedback, teachers, parents, students, board at the time. And so it was fully vetted. It was the design we were moving forward with. Obviously there's some modernization again that we talked about, but unless the board is having very specific or areas of concern with regards to that model, we'll be working on designs, and you will get to see the whole design. You'll get to see the whole process, but the single campus is something we are planning to go with. We see savings just on land acquisition, obviously, but then also combined service, shared service, some of those things as well. So
I will just say, since I was down on that trip, there was a lot of benefits of having the two campuses side by side when it came to like VAPA and music of the middle school and the high school being able to collaborate. Students that were in middle school that maybe need to take a more advanced math class could take, the eighth graders could take the ninth grade math class and not have to be moving campuses. So there was a lot of benefit of that. I did prefer the campus style more than the Sanger style, which was the single building. I think the campus style led more, I think, almost more collaboration for the kids because there seemed to be more outdoor space for them. My biggest concern is if our properties that we have are going to be big enough to facilitate some of like the athletic needs, stuff like that. Because like at Sanger, they had like 9 baseball fields. Just because when you're talking about, 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, freshmen, middle school, high school, softball, baseball, all practicing at the same time, so just that we're looking at the space of some of those facilities. But I mean, personally, I thought it was, talking to community members, that there was some resistance, I think, from our communities of like, I don't want my middle schooler on with high school kids, and talking to those community members that it was not an issue. And that they had resistance initially, and then once their kids got onto campus, they found that it was a great system for them. So, and I think for parents who have kids in middle school and high school to be able to do one pickup, one drop off is awesome, so.
Just so you know, pick up and drop off will be at different times though. Sorry.
Oh, my kid's going to early then.
We won't be releasing the land that is identified for the middle school south of 50 in Folsom until we are fully committed in moving forward with the high school, middle school concept for Folsom, right?
Correct.
All right, because once we let that land go, we're never going to be able to find that land again in that area.
Yeah, it's still master plan for that. I mean,
Okay.
as Sean mentioned, once we get some consensus moving forward, then we'll be getting negotiations with the developers and making sure that we have an adequate land. We've already done some preliminary studies on the existing property to look at, we can get that facility on there with the number of fields we have. It's a little tight, but we have, going multi-story buildings, and we think we're able to accommodate on that. And, with our land cost being 3 times the cost of the land down in Fresno, it's pretty expensive to expand on that as well. So we think we can accommodate on the existing property pending successful negotiations with the developer.
And just to add to the quantity of fields, we're programming it as if they were separate. So the middle school has enough fields to support their activities and the high school has enough, but it is nothing like the Central Valley. Again, as Matt said, they have probably 20 to 30% more acreage on their sites than even CDE recommends, simply because it's the valley and it's affordable.
Yeah, the acreage was crazy. It was like 110 acres. So to secure it seemed crazy. But I was going to say one other comment about it. Fleeting thought. But, one thing I was going to say that what's really interesting about Clovis is that each of the high school facilities had one kind of really cool feature that they had at that site. So one instead of everybody having pools, one would have an aquatic center, one would have like a awesome football stadium, one would have an amazing performing arts center. So just as we're looking at, as we move forward into the next decades and things like that, if this maybe is something to consider, that instead of building performing arts centers at every single school, that maybe we just go all in on one really, really awesome one at one location. So
That's really where our comprehensive facility plan needs to have those things tied in, right? So we know what our direction is for the next, 15, 20 years.
Makes sense.
So next steps at this point, one of the things we had here is we need to at least get, we had something about names. I don't know what we were talking about that one, Terry. Were we just going to get?
It's just starting the process because, Mather Morrison was named, and so that is kind of, I don't know if you're proposing to change it, but we don't have one, and it's been called Folsom Ranch High School. So based on the advisory committee conversations about having a neutral term, I think the sooner that it can be identified and everybody can just start using it as the name, the better off we'll be.
Yeah, we did actually see it. One of the, I think it was the Sanger campus. They actually incorporated the logo, the mascot and the name of the school into the campus, which I thought was really kind of a fun. But you have to do that. Some of that you have to do early on, right, in the process. So I think that's something we can talk about with the naming committee and through that process. But I think we need to probably work on that as well. So.
I love the recommendation of the SFID committee that suggested not putting either Rancho Cordova or Folsom in the name. And I think to a certain degree that might even go maybe with Mather, meaning Mather Morrison. So, at the very least, we might want to send that name back to the naming committee just to have a reality check if that's going to be the name we want to continue with, even if it was decided that was going to be the name 20 years ago. But yeah, I think that getting the names for these sites earlier so people get used to it, because everybody's calling it Folsom Ranch High School. And I think that's a temporary name, but we should probably figure out what we're going to call it. Yeah.
So that's something we can work on in our free time, but we'll make that happen. Before I jump off this, I just want to make sure conceptually, is there any concerns with the board? Are we, obviously, there's a lot of communication with the community. We'll be doing a lot of pieces with this, but this is the direction we're moving forward with, unless there is anything that we want to speak to at this point. Okay. And so just jumping over to the specialty high school, I do have a couple slides here that was shared by Dr. Huber and his team that I'm going to talk to. But the vision of this is to open hopefully around the same time as the comprehensive. The intent of this is to be a small specialty high school, but have an opportunity here to, as you can see here, offer comprehensive AG, advances courses, middle college, all of the opportunities that students potentially would want, CTE, kind of all of those things encompassed in one location. Which would be very exciting. I know we have a really good relationship with Dr. Pimentel and Los Rios and the whole team at Folsom Lake. So it would be, and we have an opportunity there. The location that we're actually looking at for this particular campus, we haven't finalized or identified out loud, but it would be relatively close to our existing, the campus where the comprehensive high school would be on the western side. So there'd be an opportunity for students who could then even potentially maybe just like cross the street or a small distance and be able to still pick up some of those classes maybe from the high school and vice versa. If there are some CTE classes that students would want to participate in the high school, they could jump across. Students want to play in sports or other activities, maybe we don't have some of the ancillary services, they can still go to the comprehensive high school for that, which seems like a great idea as well. Additionally, as we're aware, the new Amazon facility is being developed in that area, and so there's an opportunity not just with Amazon, but there's quite a few businesses within that area that we can incorporate, and we really want to help hopefully invest in our students, and we can help invest into their programs. So that's something I know that Dr. Huber is looking at as well. And so, I think, just so you know, there's been already, I think they've had at least 6 or 7 meetings where the administrative leadership team that are at the alternative programs have been meeting together to talk about kind of visioning what a future program would look like. If we, sky's the limit, have an opportunity to build a new campus, what would that look like as a program? And one of the campuses we went to, or school sites we went to, was over in Roseville. We went to their Pathways program, and we were very impressed and heard rave reviews about the opportunities that the students have there. It really is multiple kind of schools within a school based upon the students' needs, but there's an opportunity there for students to branch out for other opportunities, which we thought was great. And then they were able to go to the comprehensive for certain activities. And so we see this same opportunity with this new school that we're talking about here. And you can see it really is catering to the needs of the student. And that's the idea behind of this campus. You can see A to G, all the way through AG, middle college opportunities and middle college, just so everybody's familiar, is the opportunity there is when you graduate from high school, you're also graduating with college credits. At some levels, you can graduate up to a level of an AA or your associate's degree at the same time you're graduating college. Dual enrollment, so you can take classes at both levels. If you're not able to take it one, you can take it the other. Some of those require credentialing. There's a lot of layers to dual enrollment that you have to keep in mind. But in this opportunity for these students, it's a very specialized program. Small high school environment, we see that a lot, right? We see students who are academically capable at a comprehensive, but that's not where they want to be. That's not who they are. But they still want to have that high school experience. So still having a full, high school opportunity, but in a smaller campus is something that we don't offer in the same way at this moment, right? We have Kinney, but it's not quite to the same level as that A to G and all of the other pieces that we have. So you can see earlier interventions with students, and then increasing graduation rates and attendance, and efficiency of resources, right? Duplicating of services, because we have our all ed programs, kind of spread across the western portion of our district. So I think one of the things that the team really is excited about is that they can see that there is a lot of great opportunity for students here. And this is, these are some bullet points of some of the things, and this is how Ed Services works. They like to, put all the flashy adjectives and verbs to all the things that they're gonna do for kids. But the truth is I think we all can see that when a student has something that attracts them to come to school, they're more likely to attend, right? And they're more likely to have outcomes that will benefit them, which is our goal with this school. Questions on this? Again, I'm going to be very high level because I'm not an ed services person, as you're very well aware. But if I can answer your questions, I would love to do so.
I have a couple of questions.
Okay.
Is there a way to potentially change our mindset on how we describe this high school? I like the term small high school.
Okay.
When you start throwing out adjectives of specialty high school or alternative high school, it sets some people's, will misperceive what the school is. Everybody understands what a small high school is, I think, although I think we need to level set of what do we mean by a small high school. And when I say small high school, I think of 500 to 800 students, which is about, 150 to 200 students per class. Because a lot of the things that you put as the goal, well, these are the same type of goals that a comprehensive high school should be doing. Of course, there's going to be unique programming and unique opportunities at that site, just like there is unique programming and unique opportunities at Folsom High, at Vista, and at Cordova. What I have been hearing for over a decade is that we need a small high school. Not that we need a small alternative high school or small specialty high school. We need a small high school that students, just don't feel like they're getting lost in the shuffle. They don't feel they're just like one of 3,000 students. It's more personal. You get to know the teachers better. You get to know your fellow students better. And in a small high school, I keep on hearing how we can utilize sports and fields and facilities of neighboring schools. But what about sports at the small high school? Small high schools do have sports. They do have basketball teams. Some of them might have a football team. They might play a 7-member or 7-player football, or they have soccer teams. Granted, it wouldn't be at the size and the scope of the facilities that you would have at a comprehensive, but they definitely offer teams, and they do have leagues of small high schools. It's not like they would be playing against a comprehensive high school. I just don't want to rule that out, that there's the potential for sports at the small high school. Granted, if they want to play a sport that's not offered there, then maybe we could make arrangements for them to play at Cordova or at Mather Morrison or at whatever we're going to call the Ranch Cordova or the Folsom Ranch High School. There are opportunities. again, just my thoughts. I mean, maybe I'm the only one who thinks this way, but that's what I have been hearing for well over a decade, is we need a small high school. So,
And I think,
I-
go ahead, Karen.
I was just going to say, I think in the world of education, a small school has a very indicative nature of what that actually is. And it is specialized, it is alternative. And I don't think that either one of those have negative connotations at all anymore. I'm well in the depths of alternative education. And so I think that that is what people are seeking out. They are potentially seeking out a school where they could be specialized with CTE. And I think looking at it as a place where, in terms of money, we don't have the money to build a comprehensive high school, which includes all of the facilities that we've talked about in a comprehensive high school. And so a small school would allow that transition between the two campuses for those facilities that we cannot afford to buy, really. We can't afford to build them. However, there is a very large number of students, and it's increasing every single year in this state and across the nation, that are looking for alternative settings. They don't want more of the same. And so whether we are building it on a smaller scale and having smaller students and having it be exactly the same as a traditional high school, that's not what some people are looking for. And so if we want to build something different and something new and something that will be very sought after in this area, then that's what we want to focus on. We want to focus our facilities on those CTE rooms and really providing maybe a full auto shop and a full wood shop and things like that, where we aren't catering to more of the same, just on a smaller scale. And so I think we have to look at, otherwise we would just build another comprehensive high school and plan it out years ahead for more students to come. And so I think that having it be a small school and a specialized school is sort of where education is leading, and we would be in the forefront of that, I personally believe.
I'm wondering for tonight, Mr. Martin, especially for the purposes of this discussion, are you looking for just some consensus around that we like the idea of building something that's smaller? We're not necessarily looking for what we're going to be doing with that program tonight.
Yeah, exactly. I think for us, we got this information from the subgroup, and what I wanted to do is make sure to vet this, that this is what the board also is in support of, is the small school, whatever terminology you want, because we obviously need to start working on kind of idea of cost and plans, and start looking at, obviously there's a lot of input that's necessary as well, from educational leaders, our teachers, all the people that need to provide information about that. But yes, I think you're exactly right on.
Okay, yeah, the focus of the school and how we're going to market it and things, which would be a really fun conversation, but that's something that's a little bit further down the road.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the biggest is what he just said, is that it came from an advisory committee, and prior to that, it didn't exist even in the master plan or anything. So it's a brand new concept that now needs to be explored. And then I just wanted to add to David's comment about the fields, is Ed Services is already starting to talk about at least having physical education, fields, gym space for that. I think it's debatable about teams and whether you can actually support a football team and some of those things, but there's definitely a component of trying to include physical education into that facility.
So yeah, definitely the details are still far off for us to have conversations. But I think if the board is supportive of the concept of this small school, that's a high school, around the same starting time that we're looking at for our comprehensive first of two comprehensive high schools, that would be what we're trying to get as a takeaway for us right tonight.
I would love if there is a way we could challenge ourselves to build that as quickly as possible, even before the comprehensive high school. Kind of like our moonshot, if you will. Can we get this high school designed and built as quickly as possible, because I think there's a need. We certainly are experiencing overcrowding at our high schools. And it's an exciting concept.
We have capacity at our high school.
Well, I know.
What
We
I
can
would
hot seat too, and we can, sure.
but what I would tell you is one of the things you have to keep in mind also is they actually have to get the infrastructure into that area. And so the 29 timeline is partially based off of what we've talked with the developer of what they realistically think would be when roads and infrastructure will be built out to a level that we could actually build by. So we could try to do something earlier, but I don't know. There's things outside of our control as well. And then I will be honest, any kind of design work to that level when we're talking about even a small high school is still a high school. And so there's a lot of hoops we have to jump through with the state and those types of things. Not saying that we couldn't, but it is something we would have to look at. And then we'd also have to look at our cash flow for those timelines.
We could phase a small high school.
We may have to as well, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Because we do have the money set aside, at least, well, I forget the amount, 30 million towards that we could put towards it. The problem is the longer we sit on that money that we've already drawn down on the bond, the less we're going to be able to buy with it and build with it.
Yeah. And honestly, even if the money's not been drawn down, it's still going down. You understand what I mean? It doesn't matter if it's been drawn down or not, because again, the amount of the bond is static. Remember, when we pass how much do we have left? About $500 million in Measure M, right? Which we're not accessing, but that money is never, that 500 million is going to still be only 500 million in 10 years from now, right? Yeah. So it doesn't matter if it's been drawn down or not drawn down. It's still less valuable if we don't spend it now versus tomorrow. You're right. That is definitely something that we keep trying to balance out, because it's like, oh, cash flow wise, we can't afford it this year, but if we push it out 2 more years, now it's another $5 million to do the same So then, we start getting into conversations, which I wasn't going to get too much, and we're going to talk about it in the next couple slides, but, we are going to have to start being very, what's the right word? Strategic, I think is the right word, to potentially look at doing some funding options that, maybe some debt services or bands, which is bond anticipation notes, or COPs, certificates of participations, which are more or less like loans, short-term loans, until either the bond is issued or until you can pay it off. And I'm not a huge fan of using that, but when you see escalation rates that exceed the borrowing rate, we have to look at those things. And so this is where we're going to be getting into some very savvy financial decision making. But anytime you're doing those things, there's always risk, right? We didn't know what's going to happen with COVID. We didn't know the market was going to happen with the recession and the housing bubble, right? But what I will tell you is I think we have a very good, strong financial team. Our financial advisor is very strong. We have very experienced. I mean, you have 100 years worth of experience in facilities at these tables, right, between these team members. And so what I would tell you is we have to look at all of those pieces as well when you're talking about present value of money and some of those things. So.
For the record, I love the idea that Kara mentioned. I would love to see an auto shop resurrected at one of our campuses, including potentially this new campus, as well as a focus on fire or police or some type of emergency medicine type of opportunities that are out there. I mean, we toured a fire, over in San Juan Unified. They have a program there. I think that's wonderful, and I absolutely agree that we should look at things for this new small high school that are unique, that make it stand out as a unique location to go to school.
So just to be clear, at least what I'm hearing from the board, so board members, correct me if I'm not hearing this right, it sounds like there is consensus around, we really like the idea of a smaller high school. Whatever we do with it programmatically, we can talk about, but let's move forward with that idea.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you. So let's jump into some of the funding, some of the things that we have. So in the next 5 years, this is what we've identified as areas of projects. Not talking about just general modernization, those kind of types of things, but this is the big stuff here. So the third new elementary school in the south of Highway 50 area with a 28 opening. We're looking at phase 1 of our comprehensive high school with a 29 opening, especially high school with or small high school with a 29 opening. We also have to deal with temporary housing situations at our existing campuses until these schools are open. And then we also have potentially projects remaining with SFID 4 and 5 with regards to R&S, and then the remaining funds on Measure G in SFID 5. And then also we're doing our comprehensive facility plan, which we need to be diving into that conversation, like we were talking about there, looking at the next 5, 10, 15 years. And do we want to have specialty, or not specialty, but high schools that have specialty services at each of them? Do we want, some of those things when we're building these things out? But you can see just through 2029, we're looking at, about $500 million in improvements there. And that's an estimated number on an estimated number on an estimated number. But you can just see we've got a lot of different things moving around, right? So one of the things we looked at is a discussion, again, that the community group brought forward was looking at a district-wide bond. And so those projects, and this is above and beyond R&S, right? That 550 is above R&S, right? Yeah. So this is assuming R&S passes, we still have $550 million worth of activities there. So what we're talking about here is potentially in 2026, which is just a mere 2 years away, we could look at it potentially a district-wide bond that is about $500 million, $514 million. Now, what I will tell you is that's a big number. And we, as a district, we have never passed a district-wide bond. And so what I'm wanting, the biggest takeaway is that we have needs that will impact the entire district, right? And the only way we really could potentially access those is through a district-wide bond would be going out for something of this nature. And so I think what we're really talking about here is a different mindset for the next 2 years about if you're at a school where your enrollment is growing and we're having to add temporary housing to house the students, the way we can resolve that and control that is by passing this bond. If you're at a campus that has had some projects, maybe you're at one of our Rancho Cordova schools with R&S, and you've seen some of the projects and you want to see the rest of that work done, you're going to need to be able to support this bond. If you are in SFID 3 and you are at a new homeowner and you want to have a new high school that doesn't require you to drive across Highway 50 or some of those things, then you're going to want to pass this bond. And so what I think I'm showing here is there is a benefit and a reason for every community member within Folsom Cordova, regardless of where you live, to support a district-wide bond. And that is the conversation that this board and the community and staff and everybody would need to get behind very early on, because it will take the full 2 years to get us to a place where we can get the support of the community on something like this, right? And so here is just kind of, I'll be honest, this one scares me a little bit. So Terry, why don't you take this one?
We shared this one before. So this was at the advisory committee in May, and it was just starting to affirm what the projections are showing for SFID 3 on when the schools are needed. And so it's showing the phase 1 of the first high school in 2029, and then the second one in 2034. And just pointing out, again, this was a conversation advisory when we were talking about where should it be, and that the majority of the student generation was in Folsom. And you can go to the next slide.
Yeah, and you do see there that the orange, which is the second line down from the top, you see that line stabilizes, and the note there, that's the Folsom planning area more or less stabilizing out because
Full
their
build
growth, what's that?
That's full build out.
Yeah, that's that full build out at 2035. But then what you see is Rio de Oro is going and gaining, and that's pretty flat right now. If all of those developments really were to, just so you guys know, I think we're aware, Easton Place, Glenboro, Westboro, and more than 2/3 of Rio de Oro is all owned by one agency, which was more or less Aerojet. And if they are planning to list these, and so if someone actually does come in or they split these out and individual developers start taking each section of these, you could see multiples of these spike at the same time, which could totally change this projection completely. But we're using what we consider realistic but conservative assumptions on this. And I know, some of the community members in SFID3 have asked us to relook at our numbers, make sure, because they feel like the numbers are exceeding these numbers. We still feel good about these at this time, but as this school year progresses, as next year continues to grow, we'll monitor that, we'll see what our yield factors are, and we'll adjust accordingly as needed. But the truth is the number for Folsom planning, unless the yield jumps significantly, the number of housing units, we know the maximum. So the worst case scenario with that is that number gets to us sooner, and so that that bar kind of hits and flatlines earlier. So it's not really that one that gives us as much concern. It's the other ones that are lurking below and the unknown timelines with those. Those are the ones that could really, if they really jumped dramatically quickly, could then impact our ability for capacity potentially. So.
Just really quick question on that slide. This does not account for the new small high school in these numbers, because you could potentially be having 500 to 800 high school students.
Yeah, they would be taken up in some of those numbers, because these are just high school numbers here. Yeah. And that's just when those schools are needed. I don't know if we've analyzed it to the level to determine whether the small high school will impact the timeline for the second high school or not. I think that's more or less your question.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm asking. Yeah.
And so I don't know if we think it's going to impact it significantly.
Yeah, no analysis has been done on that. This slide was created before
Pre that.
it was even a concept. So, yeah, it would have to be factored into it.
Okay. All right. Terry?
Again, it was just kind of a refresher talking about, what the existing school capacities are looking like. And in the advisory committee, we had talked about, building it in 29 and maintaining, current capacities, current programs at the existing schools, and what it might look like if the bond doesn't pass, if we don't have the funding, and how those models would change in order to, increase capacity within your existing facilities. And we were able to push it out to 2034. So this was just, the impact of the growth without funding.
Right. So in essence, 29 is when we're reading at our first comprehensive high school. Otherwise, we're going to be having some temporary housing issues or housing issues. And our second is about 34, 35. That's pre the small high school conversation, right? Yes. So that might push that timeline out a little further, but it also depends on where those kids go and where the kids are coming from and all the other things that come with that, right? Because there are, we do have an existing, program that some of those kids may go to that and other pieces. So, so some of those factors come into play. But this is just giving you the first number of if all things were equal and where we think when we need to have a high school open for both sides of SFID3.
Those school capacities are assuming not hot seating, correct?
Correct.
All right. Yeah, because we're only 300 students away from that Folsom High number. We're over 2,900.
Correct.
And we're looking at a new high school in 29.
That's the next slide.
Oh, okay. All right.
So here's what happens if we were to go out for a bond in 26 and it wasn't to pass. What you're seeing there is then we will have to more or less increase capacity our existing schools by looking at ways to do that. So that's going to be temporary housing, but it's also going to be potentially programmatic. You can see there, we have specialized, at each of our 3 high schools, we have specialized programs. We have IB at Cordova High, we have our 4x4 block schedule at Vista, and we have our traditional schedule at Folsom. With that, if there are extra classes that are needed because of that, there are more periods and other things that have to happen because of those things. To maximize capacity, that may be something we look at. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, that is hopefully a worst case scenario, right? But I won't lie, at the same time, I want to be really clear to the board and then to the community and to everybody involved. If we don't have the funding to build schools, we have to figure out a way to house the kids with what we have. And I will tell you, the best example you can look at is Elk Grove. Elk Grove went to a year-round model, right? They did other things because that was the only way they could have the capacity for their existing schools. And I am not saying we're doing any of those things. I'm just saying that those are the things that are on potentially the table, right? And it's worth having in the conversation when we're talking about passage of a bond or passage of these, of funding sources, is that understanding what the impacts are if it doesn't pass. It's important for community and everybody to understand that as well, right? So that's what this slide kind of shows here. And we obviously then increase capacity out by doing Model 3, which is doing hot seat. What else is in there? Hot seating.
Yeah, I think the next slide summarizes it, maybe.
Oh, does
Nope,
it?
I'm sorry.
Okay.
It's the one after this. But yeah, so it's hot seating, it's changing the programs. We talked year-round education at elementary, may have to add additional portables onto the campuses. Class sizes may have to increase to maximum loading.
Yeah, we'd probably also talk about boundaries, pushing up, because again, where your growth is in the south, you have class space in the north, you have to adjust boundary. I mean, it's those kind of types of things, right? And hopefully this is doomsday scenario, right? Cats and dogs living together, mass hysteria. That's a Ghostbusters reference for those that didn't. Anyway, so I was just making sure you guys have an idea of, but I think it's worth putting it out there so that everybody understands all the impacts of these things, right? So, and I think that's kind of it. Any questions on that before we jump to the kind of the summary at the end? Okay. So summary is a summary slide, and it's just a summary. So summary would be, thank you so much for this time this evening. And what I would share with you is that it sounds like we have some direction from the board for us, which is very helpful for us. Thank you. It sounds like when we come forward the next time the board, you definitely would like to hear more information. Let's talk about some of the things. I want to make sure that we have referenced. I had some notes earlier. One of the things was with regards to whether or not we can look at what the delta is between a more traditional campus model to a single building model, what kind of the delta would be on that on the elementary piece. I think that was an ask. I think also there is definitely concerns that when we do our design work, that we have input and that we do look at prioritization, not just on curb appeal, but also in the classroom and the impact for educational services for students. I heard that from multiple members of the board. I think also another area that we just discussed was the idea of this specialty school and the idea of how what's really encapsulated in that. How do we market that in a way that it meets the new students' needs and really what are the students' needs, I think, as well, right? So those were some of the things I heard from that. So was there other, let me see, did anybody else get notes? Joanne, you're normally my great note taker. So
I would just say the commentary of bringing back updates more frequently.
Yes, yeah. So I guess a question for the board would be, do you like this format where we kind of do this more on a quarterly basis and we bring a depth conversation? Do we want to keep this as kind of a recurring thing? That way we can really focus, because a lot of times when we bring something facility related during a regular board meeting, it's hard to dive into it. and we don't have the ability to really have the same level of conversation we have like tonight. So is the board good with that? If maybe we just go ahead and place for the next every 3 months or so, place something and Martha can get it on the calendar? Because I know that's one of our hardest things. Only reason why it's out this far and not earlier is just this was the first date we could get everybody together. Does that sound like something that the board would like as well?
I don't know how much room I have to speak on this since that won't be affecting me, but quarterly seems really frequent, at least for the board and the district staff to have another special board meeting that often. It's my own personal take. I think even if it's twice a year, but there was information items on the regular board agendas that we don't have to get into, but at least the board seeing the information, something like that I think would work, but obviously up to the rest of the board here.
Well, maybe like 3 times a year, and it would only have to be for a very short period of time, right? All of this is definitely going to be front loaded. The design, the discussions. We're talking about 2 to 3 years, and a lot of the heavy lifting will be done. And then you probably could do it just annually after that.
Sure.
Right? But it's basically allowing the board to do their due diligence when the heavy activity and the major decisions are going to be needing to be made. I don't know if it needs to be quarterly, but it needs to happen at a regular interval.
Well, we'll work on, go ahead.
I was just say, back in the day when things were really busy and growing, you guys did, I don't want to say monthly updates, but there was always updates just at regular board meetings on what the progress was of
Right.
facilities.
We can get progress, but I think when we need to do the feedback and the back and forth, I think that's where we need these study sessions, if that works. I think we're in a place where it's new board, right? We haven't done this level, and on our side, we're more or less revamping everything. So I do think we need to have some placeholders, and I'm fine with if you guys are good with 3 times a year, I'd be fine with that. Next 3 or 4 months, we'll probably need another update. Once we get past November, so we're probably talking December is Christmas, holiday season, that makes it hard for everybody. So maybe early, sometime in January, we have our next check-in or something like that. Plus, with potentially new board member, with Mr. Hui leaving us, we will need to probably catch that person up as well, so.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. If we plan for January, postponed, get a good jump on that. So, and at that point, we can plan for every 4 months, but we can adjust that as needed.
Okay.
Well, and we can also utilize the facilities committee, if we need to do more frequent deep dives and things like that, and then, we can always report back in those at board meetings and stuff like that as well.
That's great. That would be wonderful.
And Joanne did one other note about going back and researching the past bond measures and making sure that we've picked up all the things that didn't get done.
Oh, the projects that didn't get done. Yeah. I also did have windows being a priority for the SFID 4. And then, I know we're already reaching out to the sites, but I think what we can maybe reach out to Jeanette and their team as well, just to make sure that there's an opportunity for teacher input through another source as well.
Yeah, we had talked about meeting with those groups as well.
That would be great. Okay. Wonderful.
It's much appreciated, Sean, you and your team. That's a lot of work that went into this, and it's really helpful to see it all.
I was actually on vacation for the last week and a half, so I want to give full credit to the team because I saw the emails flying back and forth quite a bit, but yeah. So.
Well, I appreciate it. So this is just a study session and a discussion, but I think we do have public comment. One public comment, Jeanette Sandsbach.
I wanted to enjoy a breakfast at Karen's with you.
I just actually have a few questions. So, go. Oh, great. Now my thing's flipped around. And, sorry. So it floated. Okay. So, part of the, so can I just make a suggestion on how public comment can go ahead and be made in the future to these types of things? Is that we do SFID 4, stop, take public comment, and then go ahead and go to SFID 3, and that you break them by those particular bond measures, because some of the people in the audience may want to be coming more to this, and it would be easier to go ahead and keep with the slideshow. So that's just a suggestion. You can take it or leave it. But I do want to go ahead and say that while we are bringing those updates, that we are also including how those renovations, those modernizations are going to be done and the timelines, because I know when we did them here in Folsom, they were kind of a hot mess. We did do Oak Chan during the summertime, and that was all modular, but we still had problems. Folsom Hills, we had to go ahead and move groups of students to different schools. So all those need to be planned and coordinated, especially since we're running into facility and capacity space. And we want to make sure that when we're doing two schools at the exact same time, which I saw Cordova Villa and Rancher Cordova Elementary School, which are pretty much overhauls, that we are informing the people that it's going to affect. So that's one. Secondly, the third elementary school that's going to be in SFID 3, I had a question whether this was part of the buy down, and there's only $30 million left that was mentioned, whether that was going to go ahead and delete all the $30 million, or was that part of that buy down? And then the smaller high school, I don't know whether it was misspoken or misphrased, but Sean went ahead and mentioned that we're bringing in all of the alternative education programs into one housing facility. And so is that what we're doing? Are we moving in Walnutwood, Innovations, all of those things into the new smaller school, high school? As I said, I didn't know whether it was misspoken or whether that was done. One real quick question. Jen, Vista Stadium was never supposed to be built, but it got built because of public pressure. So when you go ahead and suggest that we do those one-time big things, that means the board needs to stick to it.
Thanks, Jeanette. All right, that's it. That's all I see for in-person public comments. We don't have any online. She wants me to stop talking. So I'll bring it back to the board for final comments. Actually, I would, Mr. Martin, if I can follow up maybe on what Jeanette just mentioned. Just to clarify, when we were talking about the small high school, we're not talking about bringing any of those programs onto that small.
You know what, I honestly would have to defer to Dr. Huber. I think that's some of the discussion they're having is what services or opportunities would be available to the students on those campuses. Okay.
Yeah, that'd be good information, I think, for all of us to have. Thank you for bringing that up. Any final comments by the board? Mr. Reed.
Yeah, I just want to say this is a really exciting time for the district. This visioning, conceptualizing of what our future is going to look like. I thank the staff for all your hard work. I mean, putting 87 slides together is not easy, and I definitely appreciate everything you've done so far in this effort. I admittedly have always been somewhat of an impatient person, always wanting to push things, moving things faster. And I know the environment, you can only go so fast. I appreciate that. It just makes me think back to my very first meeting one-on-one with Superintendent Collegian after I got elected in 2018. I was talking about small high schools. I said, we need small high schools. Not only do we need one small high school, I told her we need 3 small high schools, and I even said, in this area, and she was very gracious in how she responded. But admittedly, it was a broad concept that the district had never, I guess, heard or discussed in the past. So even though it took 6 years, I'm really, really appreciative that we are at the point that we're talking about moving forward with a small high school. So I very much appreciate that, and it makes me happy. And then as for Rancho Cordova, I'm very excited about Measure R and S. It was probably within was definitely the first year. Another one-on-one with the superintendent Collegian, I'm like, what are we gonna do about the Rancho Cordova schools? And I mean, we gotta do improvements there. Part of that is, my time that I served on the Rancho Cordova Chamber of Commerce. I was the chair of the board there, and I toured every single school site, 10 years ago, 10 plus years ago. And it was very obvious that we needed improvements. And not to say that staff hasn't done a wonderful job. They have maintaining a 50, 60-year-old facilities. They get an A+ for that. But even with 50 and 60-year-old facilities, sometimes it's time for a change. And I'm very happy that we're moving forward with that. And we'll wait till November and we'll hope for a positive outcome. But this is one of those rare moments that as a district, we can make some transformative changes in facility-wise. But ultimately, it's about the student and it's about the teachers that teach the student. And providing state-of-the-art facilities across our entire district, not just one part of our district, is where we're going to be, and that makes me very happy. So, again, thank you for all your effort and staff and consultants for everything you've done as well. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Mr. Reed. Any others? Yeah. Mr. Swanson.
I wanted to say thanks to the team. I mentioned today while I was speaking at a chamber lunch that we're a very fortunate district to be growing. And this conversation in this study session is about a really amazing challenge, right? Is that we're trying to figure out the best way to serve our growing district. So I want to thank the team for their hard work. And yes, on study sessions, we can exceed our 10 slide limit. And Sean, you defaulted to that chair and started presenting before I made you go there. So I really wanted you to, but I also want to say thank you to the board for a really robust conversation. Your thoughtfulness is really appreciated. I do want to mention one thing specifically that was coming up while we were talking about the small high school. And I really appreciate all the points that were being said, but I want to communicate that at all of our high schools, small, medium, or large, comprehensive, that our expectations are universal, right? We're going to have high expectations, similarly high expectations at all of our schools. So a focus on A through G pathways and college access, a focus on expanding our CTE programs and developing those pathways, and a focus on dual enrollment opportunities for students to accrue college credits while they're in our schools, whether there's 100 students, 500 students, or 2,900 students. I think one of the things that needs to be named when we talk about a small high school, and Trustee Reed, I think you're mentioning that you were mentioning this, and Trustee Lofthouse, I think this is what you're getting at too, is about the student experience. Right? Students, we are a big enough district to not have a one-size-fit-all student experience at a comprehensive high school. And the way our alternative sites are currently formatted is that they're really small and alternative. So there's not a medium school, a 500-student school. It's 2,000 plus or 100 and hybrid, right? So there's just not this other experience. And for me, as we talk about our options as we head forward in meeting the needs of our community so that our students have an opportunity to feel engaged and welcome and safe, we need more options because a comprehensive high school isn't for everybody. And I think we see students opting out in whatever ways from our comprehensive high schools if they're not working for them. And it's oftentimes because we don't have the right option to meet their social emotional needs and what they're currently wired to be successful in. So I wanted to mention that as we talk about a small high school, it's not a different version of expectations, higher, lower, it's a different school experience. So I just wanted to take the time to mention that. So I appreciate the time. Thank you. I hope you agree since you already agreed on the small high school though.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah,
Right.
Well said.
All right. Well, again, thank you, Mr. Washburn. Thank you to you and your team, Mr. Martin. Not only was it an 87-slide presentation, but we got done a half hour early. That's somewhat miraculous. So well done. But again, appreciate the conversation from the board. And unless there's any objection, we are on to adjournment. Hearing none, we are adjourned.